Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Katie, and a member of the CK-12 team, and my colleague Ryan and I will be running today's webinar, Using Flexbooks with Students. We're so glad you've joined us. Before I introduce you to CK-12, I'd like to go over a few logistics about Zoom and make sure everyone's comfortable. I know we go through this every time, but we just want to make sure everyone gets their questions answered. So if you are looking at your Zoom option, you'll see a Q&A window. So if you have questions for us, make sure you put them in there. And in the chat window, actually, they've updated it. So just say all panelists and attendees. So just make sure you switch from that default of all panelists to all panelists and attendees. For that community conversation, we encourage you to talk to each other, share your resources, and all the rest. But we'll track and go through all the questions in Q&A. We'll focus on the ones for this topic, and then we'll get to any other ones, either via text or as we continue our demonstration. So this is part of the CK-12 Certified Educator Program. If you're just joining us today for your first time, you can register for any other sessions at ck12.org/jumpstart. And you can go to our program homepage at ck12.org/certified2017. We've also updated the footer. So if you're on any CK-12 page and you scroll to the bottom where it says Certified Educator Program, you can actually click on that and it will take you to that homepage. And if you still need to register, you can go from there to registration. So definitely check that out as you go. For those of you working on pathways, we tried to group them together. This one fits in that Flexbooks or content pathway. Really, as we said, that those pathways are all options. They were just ways to kind of think about organizing choices for this program. But whether you've taken a custom pathway, intelligent, or content, we're excited that you're here with us today. So at this point, I would like to introduce you to my coworker, Ryan, and he's going to take over from here.
Thanks, Katie, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. We're excited you're here. In this webinar, we'll be covering three main topics. We'll be looking at how to choose a Flexbook to use with your students in order to have the best fit for your class. Secondly, we'll be looking at strategies for using Flexbooks with your students so that you have something to take away from this session to use directly in your class. And third, we'll look at a case study of Flexbook use at the college level. Our main goal is that by the end of this session, you come away with specific and actionable strategies to engage your students using CK-12 Flexbooks. But before we get into the core content of the webinar, it would be great if we found out a little bit more about you. You'll see a poll here in a few seconds that will prompt you to respond to a question. This information will help us have a better context of your Flexbook use. So go ahead and answer the following question. How do you utilize Flexbooks in your teaching? So I'll wait here and let you take a second to answer this question. So we're just waiting for a couple more answers to come in, and then we'll take a look at the results to move forward. All right, so thank you everyone for answering today, and we just wanted to show those results so that everyone has a pretty good idea of where everyone's coming from. So it looks like most people have actually never used Flexbooks before, and so hopefully today you get a lot of really good strategies that you'll be able to take forward with you as you start implementing Flexbook use. Some of you have used it as a supplemental resource, which is great. And then others have used it as a primary curriculum, and we even have some experts in the room who have customized their Flexbooks or have used Flexbooks as a primary curriculum. So with that being said, we're going to jump right into our content for today. So I'm assuming most of you have at least heard about Flexbooks if you are at this webinar. This slide just provides a simple overview to ensure those with any wavering confidence at this point. But the main strategies that we're going to look at will help you understand how to utilize this excellent digital and customizable resource with your students. So let's take a look at some of those ways in which you can find a Flexbook that would be best to use with your students. So in order to use Flexbooks with your students, it's important to be confident finding and choosing the correct Flexbook for your purposes. We wanted to take a minute to highlight a variety of methods that can be used to locate a Flexbook that would be most useful for your purposes. We will try to demonstrate several of these methods to find Flexbooks during the course of this webinar. The first method would be to choose a Flexbook based on standards. From the home page, you can find a standards browser that can help you identify a Flexbook that would align with the set of standards that best fits your needs. Secondly, you can look at choosing a Flexbook based on looking at the Browse page and going to Subjects. From the main Browse page, if you choose the subject that is most directly aligned to what you need and click on the tab for Flexbooks textbooks, you'll see all of the offerings that CK-12 has on that particular subject. The next way is to find a Flexbook from the user contributions. We have a very active community that has contributed a lot of content. If you search for a topic, you can filter results based on what has been contributed by clicking on the Community Contributed tab. This is a great place to look for resources, especially those other than math and science. A next good place to look for Flexbooks would be choosing a Flexbook based on looking at a specific schools page. If you're on the home page, you can browse to the schools page by clicking on the schools circle, where you can find other nearby schools that may have already done work customizing or creating Flexbooks in your state. This could help provide a very valuable starting point. And last but not least, if you don't find any Flexbook that suits your needs, you can create a Flexbook from scratch. If you go into your library, there's an option to click Create New, and under that menu, there's Create New Flexbook. This will create a brand new Flexbook for you to work in. You can now add content from other resources by going to something you want to add and choosing Add to Flexbook Textbook. Then make sure to choose the correct Flexbook to transfer this material into. So now that we've looked at ways in which to identify Flexbooks, we want to take a look at strategies for how you can utilize these Flexbooks in your classroom. A first effective method that you can use is to build your own digital learning playlists by adding links to other resources. This could include videos, interactives, reading content, and this would allow you to make a fully immersive learning experience for your students using Flexbooks as a digital platform. Secondly, if you've ever been interested in flipping your classroom, CK-12 resources can be used as an effective resource for those looking to do so. Students could utilize Flexbooks, videos, simulations, and even practice outside of class time so that you could produce discussions, labs, or other group activities during the day. CK-12 is a great resource if you're looking to reduce your paper use. You could easily use CK-12 resources without a need for printing reading materials, and CK-12 Flexbooks can be accessed online at ck12.org or via the Flexbook app. The Flexbook app now even allows for offline reading, where students can download chapters or even entire texts. Another alternative is to use Flexbooks in class instead of lecturing. Flexbooks that contain practice questions directly embedded in the content will provide an interactive reading experience for students. This could provide a better alternative to lecturing in your current classroom. Based on these 4 strategies, we want to now take a look at a video featuring Chris Pickens explaining how his use of Flexbooks has really changed his teaching practice.
This is the funnest year I've ever had. These students have the level of engagement with the Chromebooks and the CK-12 and just the variety of resources that are out there that are online is just amazing. It's changed my career. I think the students can sense that. I'm excited to come into school every day because I'm learning something new every day. I didn't realize that something this simple as a Chromebook and some online textbooks could change the way that I teach that much, but it's been pretty much a door that has opened that I can't close anymore. And I think that the future in science and in teaching is going to be amazing. I've been telling my principal that I think in the next couple of years, that Canfield is going to be like blasting off like a rocket ship. I mean, there's so much cool stuff going on out there.
All right, thank you, Chris, and thank you for your enthusiasm in using the CK-12 platform. So now what I want to do is take a chance to actually do some demonstrations of some of the strategies that we just talked about. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So the first thing I wanted to demonstrate is I talked about using Flexbooks as a way of making a digital playlist for your students. This could provide a really effective way to include videos, reads, interactives in order to make a complete resource for your students to learn a subject. So the way I want to do that is I'm going to use one of the methods we talked about, which is I'm actually going to create a Flexbook. So I'm going to go into my library, and then you'll see there's this Create New button. If I click on that Create New button, I'll see that one of the options is that I can actually create a new Flexbook textbook. And so if I click on this tab, it will give me the option to actually start a new Flexbook from scratch, and then I can go and add resources to this Flexbook that I think would be most useful for my students. So I'm going to go ahead and just name it Playlists for Biology. And I'm going to go ahead and save. So now I actually have my own Flexbook that I can go ahead and add resources to. For the sake of this demonstration, I already went ahead and actually made some playlists for us to take a look at. So I created a playlist on cells. And what I did is I went through various CK-12 resources, and I would just go, and whenever I saw this add to Flexbook textbook of something that I liked, I would click on that and add it to this new resource that I created for my students. The great thing about this digital playlist idea is that it really gives you the opportunity to add a variety of resources to allow students to learn a particular topic. So this, for example, has videos, it has text, it also has practice questions that I embedded directly into this read. This provides an all-encompassing learning environment for students. The second thing I wanted to demonstrate is we mentioned that you can use Flexbooks as an alternative to lecturing in your class. Something that we recently added to our concept collection Flexbooks is an embedded practice view. And I wanted to show you all what that looks like because I think it could be a very effective resource for students. So the way I'm going to get to this is I'm going to actually show a second method for finding Flexbooks, which is through the Browse view. So if I go down to this Browse view, it will show me the subjects that I look at the most, or I can expand it and see all subjects. We're going to go ahead and take a look at physical science concepts today, because I did see that there were a lot of middle school teachers in the audience. And I want to show you here that if you click on this tab right here for Flexbook textbooks, you'll actually see the CK-12 offerings in this topic. At this point, it will be valuable to understand the difference between these two resources if you don't know already. All of the Flexbooks that have concepts in the title are Flexbooks where we have broken up the material into smaller bite-sized chunks that might be easier for lesson consumption. All of our original resources we developed, the CK-12 resources that have teacher editions and workbooks, actually have very extensive resources, and this would be a good starting point if you're looking to customize your own resource. We're going to take a look at the concepts collection today, because all of the concepts collections, like we said, they're broken down into those smaller chunks. Let's go ahead and take a look at chemical interactions, and then let's take a look at this section on chemical bonds. What I'll see is that on student accounts, there is now an embedded practice question inside of the read. This can provide a really effective learning experience for students rather than a teacher simply lecturing and trying to answer questions on a one-by-one basis. This resource could actually allow for each student to try and test their own understanding of a concept by answering questions while reading the topic for themselves.
So I think at this point in time, we will take a few questions that have come in and give you guys a chance to ask some more while we are paused for a second. So we've had a couple different questions that come in regarding kind of this playlist. So I think since Ryan's in there talking, maybe he can start by answering that question. And the question is the playlist a separate textbook that just has sort of activities, or maybe could you put those activities in actually the real text, or what are the options for that and how does that work?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think you could really do it as either method. You could certainly take a existing Flexbook and add additional resources to that in order to make it more extensive to your liking. Excuse me. Or you could also just take a particular topic like I did with cells, and you can include multiple different resources for that one topic. So I can see this easily being done for a chapter, where you take a chapter and then for each chapter, maybe you have a different, you can go into that section and you'll actually see all the different resources. So I'll show you some different resources in here as well. So something that we have on our site, which is really great content, is our interactive content called the Plix. And so what I did here is for the student to be easily able to access this interactive content, I put it right here in this playlist. So now as a student, if I click directly on this link, it will actually take me to some interactive content in order to help me learn about this topic of cells. So with that being said, this would allow me as a student to continue to learn about this topic of cells by maybe choosing a resource that is more interesting to me. And I think that's really a strength of the playlist idea, is that it really allows students an aspect of choice to choose whatever resource might be most beneficial for them in learning a particular topic.
Thanks, Ryan. We had a couple of questions that came in regarding kind of, is this quiz side only in concept books? Do all concepts come with the practice on the side? The answer to that is yes and yes. So right now our concepts, because those are correlated one-to-one with that practice information and that the rest of those resources, the practice is actually at that smaller chunk level or that smaller bite size level. And so it will show up in the concept books, but not kind of the larger multi-concept lessons in our original books. And then anyone that is a concept and has that matching stuff, if you're accessing it within the book itself and not from the concept page, when you could access all of this kind of however you wanted, right now that's where the practice will show up. So that's one of those pieces. And then we had a couple of questions about resources for kind of alternate environments. So one is about homeschool resources. Maybe you could click on the cafe for a second. We did have a person request last week, actually, if we could create a forum for homeschool teachers. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom right now, you'll see the homeschool corner. So if you're homeschooling, you're more than welcome to join that and connect with others and ask questions. If you have questions for us kind of about that particular environment, you're welcome to touch base kind of in office hours and we can talk about some strategies. There's not kind of specific places on our site other than this new forum that would be specifically for homeschool teachers, but I think this idea of personalizing learning and really working with students to kind of address all of these different needs and different options for learning kind of addresses that as it is. So we have kind of going back to that practice piece, I'm just going to explain that one right there for one more second. And that practice component on the side, if you want to see any student report for anything that you're working on, you do need to assign it within your class. So if you go to like the class group up in the top, you could see kind of your reports, you could see your assignments. So any different piece, so if you assign a read and you want them to you want a separate score to see if they also watched the video within it, or they also did the practice within it, you need to assign all of those components so you get the scores for all of those pieces as you're working your way through. So I think it looks like we're getting kind of specific questions about kind of how you do certain pieces in terms of the Flexbook editing part. This one particular session is on strategies, so I'm gonna let Ryan continue to demo, and then we'll make sure that kind of as we work our way through, you'll get to see certain pieces of this, and we'll get into those kind of specifics on how to do something or issues that would be there. But let me answer one last one in here. It says, if I wanted to attach a link from, say, a video or something else, would that violate any kind of copyright? So if you have any questions about copyright, I would recommend that you link out to something, because that way you're not including the whole content in your book and you're not worried about breaking copyright by pulling that piece in. If you're talking about YouTube videos, I definitely recommend you kind of check to see if you think they're going to get pulled down before you put a link like that in there. They often, for something that looks like it might be copyrighted, YouTube will pull that content sometimes. And so you just want to make sure that you're using stuff that you think, even when students link out to that they would actually be able to see the pieces and they wouldn't have issues with that part. So I think from there, I'm going to switch over and share my screen for a second, and we'll go back into a couple just general pieces for our next part, and we'll let Ryan take over.
Great, thanks, Katie. So thanks for all those questions, and we hope that they keep coming. We just wanted to take a look at continuing this conversation by showing you some more strategies that could potentially be used for using Flexbooks. Another idea could be to have students make videos recapping the sections that they read in their Flexbook. These videos could then be utilized as review assignments or even included in future Flexbooks to make them more personal for future students. Another strategy could be that students can make their own real-world examples. This could help provide that ability to really apply those higher-level thinking skills and to analyze, evaluate, and even having students create their own content. Another strategy that could be useful for a foreign language class would be to translate Flexbooks as an assignment. This could provide foreign language students that ability to access the resources that have been made by the entire CK-12 community. And in turn, potentially these resources could be used by students in a different language. Another resource that I always was interested in as a science teacher was using lab journals for science. The CK-12 platform could provide a great way to encourage students to work more deeply on their work. Students could take a Flexbook and then turn it into a digital lab journal. This would allow students to have direct access to the science content they're working on so they could reference it during their lab work and include charts right into the content. The last strategy before we go into another video and demo would be how CK-12 resources can really be effective as personalized reading materials for students. CK-12 Flexbooks are easy to customize, which can provide an opportunity to personalize the text for your students. CK-12 offers much of its content at a variety of levels, including basic, advanced, and at grade. Let's first take a look at a video featuring Jenna Morris explaining how Flexbooks can be used to differentiate resources for students.
I have an amazing special ed teacher in my room right now, and she uses my book. She looks ahead of what we're doing, and so she can make accommodations and modifications for students. And we've actually talked about how cool it would be to take each book and make a special ed modified and accommodation section, and that would be awesome in my book, to go ahead and have that special ed teacher to modify and accommodate for each student, for each book.
Great, so now let's take a look at what creating a lab journal for science might look like. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So in terms of what a lab notebook might look like, I'm going to go into my library and take a look at a resource that I have created by taking one of our concept collection Flexbooks So we're going to take a look at this resource, and we're going to look at the section on plants. Let's say you had your students do a lab on plants, and more specifically, they were doing it on plant characteristics. So as a student, let's say during the course of this lab, I have this content here directly to reference, but I actually wanted to go in and add my own chart so that I can start putting in some of the data from the lab that I'm actually working on. So as a student, I can go ahead and I can edit this concept. So this is assuming that your students have taken a Flexbook and they have customized it so that it's now in their library. They could go into that particular section, and let's say they wanted to input, they were doing a lot of research on plants, and they wanted to put a chart right here where it's saying what are plants, because that is a particular interest of them in this lab they're working on. They could go ahead and they could insert a chart right here inside of the content so that they could make direct references to the content during their lab. This really gives the opportunity to enrich the work that students are doing because they have direct connection to the content above. So maybe they were looking at different plant types, and maybe they had things like a defining characteristic. And maybe they wanted to look at the number of stems on the leaves. The student can now directly input this chart into their content. And so they could go back and refer to this content while they're working on the rest of their lab notebook. This could make a really empowering resource for students when they're working on their particular lab assignments.
Thanks, Ryan. So we have a couple of questions that have to do with kind of how students access stuff, what that's looking like. So let me try to answer one or two of these, and then I'm going to have you demo highlighting and note-taking because that's a great strategy to work with, and it's something that we can work off of. But before you pull that up, we have a question about when you share a Flexbook with students, is it a copy they can edit and add their own notes, etc.? So just like when you customize content from CK-12, our original content stays intact, and you create a copy that you can then modify within your own library. If you're sharing that book with students, they could technically take that book and customize it into their own and adjust it and make their own book or whatever they wanted to do there. And they could add any extra pieces in there. But with that, they could also do what Ryan's about to show you, which is highlighting and note-taking on your copy. And just to note that this is something that lives in their account, so you would need to kind of have them show you what they had highlighted or taken notes for. So I'm going to let Ryan go ahead and demo that piece.
Great, thanks, Katie. So let's go ahead, and I just switched over to a student account. And let's go ahead and access a Flexbook that I currently have in my library as a student. So let's go to, most of us, like we said, are more middle school and high school. So let's go into chapter 7 here, chapter 9 on grade 7. And let's go into lines of numbers. So when I'm in this content as a student, I can go ahead and use this notes or highlighting feature where if I go ahead and highlight some content, I could actually highlight it in one of a variety of colors. I can also add notes for myself. So maybe this is really important and I want to come back and look at this later. So I can maybe just make a note for myself. And so I can go back as a student at any time, and I could actually see these highlights or notes. As Katie mentioned, these highlights and notes live in the account of the student, and so they are not accessible to me as a teacher.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, if they're highlighting and note-taking, because each student's one would be kind of different in there and you'd want to be able to see what their notes are, that lives in their account. If they created a Flexbook as a lab journal, they could share that. Ryan maybe can just click on that green little share plane on the bottom right. They can share that with you that way and email it to you so you have a copy of that, or share it to Google Classroom. If he closes out of that and scrolls up a bit, they could also share a resource if you created a study group. So within class groups, you as a teacher are the only one that can share to a group, but if you created a study group that goes with it, you could have students share their lab journals, but that would be with each other as well. So if you just want your own copy, have them use that share a plane and work their way through. So it's looking like, let's see if we can answer a couple more questions here. We have some questions kind of about resources in other languages. So we'll be getting to that shortly. So just hold on to those for a few minutes and we can talk about what that looks like. And we have a couple of questions about kind of using a learning management system and also sharing resources. So this particular question says, if you are using Canvas to deliver instruction, but you're adding CK-12 resources, would it be confusing or pointless to share the Flexbook? And I would say no to that. So in Canvas and Schoology, you're actually adding, because those are fully integrated with CK-12, when you're making assignments for a student, you're assigning at the section level because that would be what you would be grading at. So it would also be probably helpful for them to see that in context as a whole book. So I would see there's no reason not to share that book as a whole. They could access it from there. If they are trying to do those assignments, then you're going to want to make sure that they're accessing the sections from within Canvas so that they can click the Turn It In button and get credit for doing that. But having kind of the book as a general reference, I think, would be super, super useful. So let's have maybe Ryan continue. We'll continue to answer some of these questions, and we'll go from there.
Great, thanks, Katie. So like Katie said, we'll take a look at a couple more strategies, and then we'll be sure to leave lots of time to answer your questions after we go through these last couple of strategies. Another strategy that could be used is to produce a Flexbook as a way of storing a common curriculum for a department, a grade level team, an entire district. So you could develop a custom Flexbook, and this Flexbook could then be accessed by all teachers at that district, at that school, and this could certainly provide a way in which to promote discussion, to help PLC groups, and this could very much lead to enhanced collaboration among teachers and staff. Another resource, another strategy that we talked about that you guys alluded to is a way to actually use Flexbooks to support non-English native speakers. So you could actually, CK-12 has a Google Translate functionality that could help provide an access point to parents and students who currently don't have an understanding of a language. And we also have some books on CK-12 that have been translated into Spanish that we will be showing you how to find in just a moment. Another strategy would be to allow students to actually create their own Flexbook for a course, for a project. This could be a really empowering way in which students actually have real ownership over the material in which they're learning. Now, based on these strategies, we'll take a look at a video featuring Dr. Cynthia Ontiveros explaining how Flexbooks have helped support their parent community of non-English speakers.
Parents, I believe, are an untapped resource that really districts, schools, teachers we really need to think about how we can incorporate them into the learning process of our students, of our children. One example, I met a man who had just come over to the United States from the Philippines, and he brought his two daughters who didn't know English, but they were working very hard in their classrooms. And he asked me, what could he do to support them? What books could he buy? And it clicked to me, and I took out my iPad and I took him to the CK-12.org website, and I showed him, we talked about what concept is she learning right now. We looked it up, and I showed him the magic button where he could switch the language so that he can read the language, understand the content that his daughter was learning, and then be able to explain to her in his language, in their language. And the gentleman was nearly in tears, and myself too, because he was so excited that he had a resource that was free, that was available to him to be able to use, and he can go home and use it that night, that right after our conversation. So for me, that is important for us to consider the role of the parent and bringing the parents involved in the process. You know, our children are going to bring home difficult homework concepts that maybe been years since they were in the classroom or just didn't learn that material. And so as a parent, it's important for us to, or as an educator, it's important to give parents those resources so they can find a way to connect with their children and be a resource and really bring that home to school connection, make that a reality.
Great. So now we're going to take another opportunity to demo some of these strategies and ideas that we have been mentioning. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So the first thing we wanted to show you was this idea of using a Flexbook as a common resource for teachers at a department level, at a district level. And so the way I'm going to demonstrate that is I'm going to find a Flexbook through one of the methods that we talked about, which was actually going and looking at this schools level. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this schools button from the home page. And we know that there's some really good work being done in English language arts that CK-12 was not originally offering at the Tullahoma City Schools District. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to go down to this district, and we're going to take a look at the English language arts book for 7th grade. So if we go ahead and take a look at this resource, the way this resource was designed was it's a resource designed to be more of a teacher resource. It offers strategies, it offers ways in which to help your students understand a particular topic, but it's meant to be more of a teacher document. And this has been an effective way for this particular school district in order to collaborate on how they're actually teaching English language arts. So this is just an example like we talked about, where you could think of a Flexbook in another way. Instead of just a way to present content to your students, you could also think of it as a way to actually share content amongst colleagues or amongst an entire district. The second demonstration that we wanted to do is we wanted to take a look at how could I find Flexbooks in a different language. So I wanted to go ahead and use this search feature to find these Flexbooks. And like I said, I know that there are some Flexbooks that have been translated into Spanish. So if I go ahead and I search Spanish, CK-12 actually understands this search, and it shows me that there are some Flexbooks that have been translated into Spanish with the grant that CK-12 received. So if I go into this resource has been translated by translators that went in and translated this content from English into Spanish. So we have this available with 10 books that are primarily math. So if this is a resource that would benefit you, feel free to utilize this resource. However, let's say you are actually looking for using a different book that we currently don't have in Spanish. Let's say I'm a life science teacher and I want to help some of my students who don't currently have a resource that's accessible to them. If I go into that resource, just like we saw in the video, it explains that at the bottom of each page, we have a Google Translate widget that could help you using Google Translate to convert the book into a different language. We cannot guarantee this is a perfect translation, but it at least is an available resource to help students who might be speaking a different language. Let's say, for example, you had a French foreign exchange student. So now, forevermore, when I'm looking at this book, it knows that I want to translate it into the French language. And so it will be using Google Translate in order to translate this resource into French to the best of its ability.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. We have some different questions in here that have to do with the difficulty level of the text, the kind of what the author is for here as well. So maybe you could click on that details tab for a second at the top of this read. So
Sure, let me just go ahead and put it back into English so that I can understand it a little bit better. And then I would be happy to show you the details. So if we go in, like Katie was mentioning, we can look at this details tab.
So here you'll see the authors and the contributors for this particular piece. I'm just going to have Ryan mute himself so that we don't have a little bit of feedback. Sorry about that. And so as I go through here, you can see the authors and contributors, and as you continue to scroll down, you can see kind of concept nodes, grade levels, what that looks like. If you are customizing a book, you can update content that way. If you are, there's not necessarily kind of, our books are tagged at grade, basic, or advanced for your benefit. If you're customizing it yourself, you can add that information in however you want. But changing the difficulty level of a Flexbook would be either picking a different Flexbook at that other level that's available within your site, or adjusting it and customizing it yourself. But if you're in edit mode, that details tab will also allow you that all of this information, so you can update it to include your information as well, or anything else that you're looking for. So those are some of the pieces. We have a bunch of questions. I'm going to have him actually jump back to this idea of a lab journal. And the idea of a lab journal, there's a number of different pieces in here in terms of how do I make a Flexbook as a lab journal? Or do we have an example of what that looks like? Or how can students, annotate or write on that? So maybe you could just talk a little bit more about what you're thinking about when you're saying a lab journal, and then how, if that's a student created one or a teacher created one, or how that works in terms of what's happening.
Yeah, I would be happy to do that, Katie. So the idea of a lab journal is something that I consistently heard in my time as a physics teacher when I would go to NSTA conferences or just talk with other teachers about a way to engage students more deeply in the work that they're doing. So my thought with showing this idea of a lab journal was that, let's say as a teacher, you have a Flexbook that you're using in your class. Your students could then take and customize that Flexbook to make their own version of the text. So this biology lab journal is an example of, let's say that as a student, I took the Flexbook that my teacher is using for their class, and I go ahead and click customize so that I have my own version saved in my library. I could then utilize all of this content to help support me in my work during class time. I'm assuming a lot of you science teachers really like doing labs, or let's say you do interactive assignments with simulations. And the Flexbook could be a great place for students to help go ahead and log that work so that they don't have to go and look at multiple resources in order to find all of their notes, all of their charts that they've done for a particular assignment. So like I was showing you with that example, that section of plants, because I've already saved it into my library, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to that section. On plant characteristics, the student would be able to take any section in the Flexbook that might relate to work they're doing and go ahead and edit it to make any kind of notes, charts. The student could even potentially insert images. Let's say they take images during the course of a lab. It could be a really powerful way for students to make the content more engaging and more relevant to the work they're doing. You could also have students create a new section if they didn't want to edit an existing section that could potentially say plants lab. And students can create an entirely separate section that would have all of their work that they did on that lab assignment. It could be another way you could potentially implement a lab journal in your class.
Thanks. So we had one comment that came in kind of into our Q&A that says, if a student makes their own version and you update yours, the student version is out of date. That is accurate. As soon as someone customizes, whether it's from our content and they start updating their own reads, or you create a book and students start updating it, that version is out of date. So if you want them to see your updated version, then you'd want to share that resource. You could do that via groups, even if you haven't published it already. So that's not really a problem in terms of the published versus not published. You can still share via an email. So as long as they have either within groups or they have the URL to that page, they can access it. But what Ryan is talking about kind of in terms of students creating their own version would be more like an assignment for that content, not as their textbook resource for that particular piece. So just know that as you're working from there, it's not that they would be adding it to yours or what that looks like. Similarly, we had a comment about kind of saying, well, students could put an element box to put a note right by the section, and that's accurate. So they could add, if they wanted to customize it and add any of their own notes and then share that doc back to you with that text, they could show you that without you having to be accessing their highlighting notes within their account. So that would be one option for them to kind of put notes within there and then share that text back with you. So that is accurate. So let's see what other questions we have. We'll take maybe questions for a few more minutes, and then we'll do some core wrap up, and then we'll always continue on for at the end, and we'll answer all these questions. So this one said, if a student kind of makes a section, can they share just that section? So right here, this URL, if Ryan was going to share this, he would just be sharing this section. He wouldn't be sharing the whole book. A student in accessing it could kind of navigate from there, but they would be starting with sharing that particular section they're working off of. And then we had a question about concept nodes. So maybe you could go back to that details page for a second, or tab within this book. And at the very bottom, it says concept nodes, and it says plant characteristics. So this particular read is in our concept of plant characteristics. So if you've been joining us for a number of sessions, you've heard all about concept-based learning and concept modalities. And if Ryan scrolls up to the top a little bit there, you'll be able to see kind of all the way up. If it's this is part of a book, but if it was, you can see that practice preview. So that tells you that it's linked to that concept as well. And you could access other resources by searching for that concept or kind of linking to that particular concept. So a concept node is really just the title we gave for that bite-sized chunk of information as we worked in. So there's kind of some technical questions and little bitty pieces, which we'll kind of do at the end. But I think Ryan has a comment, so we'll let him jump in.
So like we said, we'll go ahead and get to those technical questions in just a second, but something I felt could be really empowering would be to share a teacher use case with all of you of someone that I have actually had the opportunity of talking with a couple of times. And so I wanted to introduce Kamala Dorsner. So Dr. Dorsner is an environmental science professor who works both at a local school in Croatia and also with the University of the People. Her work with the University of the People, which is an institution that tries to provide low-cost college degrees to students, led her to wanting a resource that would be freely available to her students in order to help with the mission of the university. She took it upon herself to actually develop a great resource from scratch that she is now working hard to improve and keep up to date. So on our CK-12 platform, if you actually look for the Essentials of Environmental Science Flexbook, this professor created an entire environmental science textbook aimed at the college level which is now being used by her students all around the world. Something that has been really amazing based on talking with Kamala about her story is the fact that students who don't have internet access or have varied ways of accessing resources for their classes have still had very good success in accessing the Flexbook based on the variety of ways in which they can engage with this content. I think this is a pretty amazing story that helps to really resonate the idea that Flexbooks can be a transformative way in which to use learning resources.
Thanks, Ryan. So I'm going to go in and kind of say we have about 10 minutes left in our hour, and we're getting some great questions in here. So let me go ahead and answer some of these just while we're going from here, and then we can go into the final pieces of this webinar and just wrap everything up. So the first one that we got was a comment about privacy issues. If you are having students make their own videos and add them in, or kind of add images or pieces like that, make sure that you work with them and explain to them kind of the copyright requirements within our site, as well as best practices for posting video if they're making videos of themselves for kind of a class project, and that you have the permissions from there. So that's something that you're going to want to just double check when you work in there. We have some questions about like common curricula Flexbook sharing with other teachers. And so I'm going to talk about best practices for a minute about editing common books and sharing common books. In terms of what you're doing, any shared resource, any shared curriculum that you're working off of, you're going to want to make sure it lives in one book. As we were explaining, every time someone customizes, they make a separate copy, and then there's not really a clean way to kind of take those updates and put them back into your book there, because you already have a copy of that that's now out of date if you've customized it in a new place. So you are going to want to kind of make a core account and that you do that work in. And within that, you're only going to ever want to have one person editing any book at any point in time. So you want to make sure you're not all in there overriding each other's saves as you're working from there. But once wherever that book lives, you can share that book via maybe a CK-12 study group that you're working with your colleagues and posting questions and adding information, or you could just share the URL and that link. So you're welcome to kind of share that in any regard as you're working your way through. If you're talking about kind of sharing for one of these labs, Ryan was talking about kind of, you can create a lab journal, and then that would be the core kind of basic one for the class. From there, if students made any updates and edits in their own version, then they would have to just email you that so you could see their updates. It's not that they would be sharing that back. They wouldn't be adding to that whole class lab journal. So the same deal from there. If you were going to do kind of a class-created lab journal that you were building together, then you'd want to make sure that you had one place, and once again, kind of a point person for making those updates, and it was living in one place. So sharing, if people are customizing and sharing back, just understand that they're making their own version, and that's totally fine if you want to use that as their way to kind of answer questions. But if you wanted to go backwards from there, then you'd want to make sure that that was kind of clarified as you worked your way through. So let me take maybe one more question right now, and then we're going to do some wrap up of the details for this particular thing. And then as always, we'll continue to stay on. So we have kind of some questions about student accounts and teacher accounts. And I think that that is a big question in terms of accessing the account. If you're having any trouble, and when we go back on, we'll show you kind of where to check your settings in a second. But if for some reason you've decided to, add a test student to your classes so you could access that kind of using a separate Google email address or, whatever kind of extra one you wanted to use to show that piece. If you're having trouble accessing it and still reading as a teacher, then you just need to go in settings and make sure that account is reading as a student. Because as a teacher, you'll see the preview options for practice. As a student, you would see that embedded widget if it was kind of one of those concept pieces as you worked your way there. So definitely just make sure that kind of that account is set accordingly. And if you're having trouble with that, you can always email support and we can get that account updated for you. So we also that last piece, I know I said one, but maybe I'll take one more in terms of the lab journals, because we still have been talking about this. The question was, can we as teachers make comments in the student's journal? This is not a back and forth option. You would then have to like customize their journal and add extra pieces and send it back to them. It's not like a Google Doc where you have a doc and a kid adds some comments and then you can add a comment to it and you can see all those pieces. It doesn't have that same level of kind of everyone working in the same doc as you're working your way through. They can share their answers with you if you wanted to, but if you wanted to give them feedback, then you would probably want to do that just kind of meeting with them, or you could print a PDF of it and give them feedback. They could print a PDF of your customized version and write their answers on it if they wanted to do that. But it doesn't go back and forth in that way that you're potentially thinking of. I would recommend at this point, given that there's been a bunch of questions on how that works, that maybe you just try it sometime in your class. Say, I'm going to create a book. I'm going to let my kids try customizing it. I'm going to see what they send back to me. I'm going to see the best ways to do that. And if you find a great way that works in your class, then I encourage you to share that on our forum. And maybe if you have any great little tips and tricks, share those with other teachers, and that will hopefully help them learn and go from there. So I think with that we're going to kind of wrap up some core pieces of information for this webinar. So one is your assignments, as always, are in here. You can see using Flexbooks with students. So please complete the following tasks. You can access that on our kind of program page that we said you can now get to from that certified educator link at the bottom, or directly from ck12.org/certified 2017. And if you want to just access the assignment directly without going to that title for this session and clicking on that link, today's tiny URL is CEP17 FB students. So basically that idea of Flexbooks with students. If you went from here, you could then go through and go to our program page, as we said here, and you could go down under that session information and find all of those pieces. If you're looking for the recorded webinars, all of the webinars are archived in one spot at the bottom of this page, so go ahead and check those out as well. We are continuing to build this program. We've gotten some great feedback. We've tried to incorporate some of that we can incorporate this year, and some that we've listed for, hey, that would be a great idea for next year, but because of how things are already kind of logistically working, we maybe can't take that into account yet. But please continue to give us feedback and let us know what would be beneficial, what would be useful, and how things, stuff that you love that you think we should keep for future variations of this programming. So I think with that, we're going to say thank you for joining us. We're going to go back on in a minute and answer a bunch of these questions. So as always, we'll stay on, but if you don't have any questions and you're good to go and you just want to explore, you are welcome to do that. And you can always kind of email support@ck12.org if you have those questions as we go. So I think from there, we're going to jump back over and see some of those questions. So maybe I'll have Ryan share his screen and just show you where that your account is so that you can update it from a teacher to a student.
Sure, Katie. So I'm just going to go back to the main website, the homepage of CK-12.org. And you'll see here that currently I'm tagged as a teacher. That's because when I registered on this account, I chose that I was a teacher at that point. If you go into the actual settings of your account, you can see that your account, in terms of, you can change your profile, and you can actually see, if you click there, this is where I can see in my profile whether when I've registered, if I've registered as a teacher or as a student. So like we said, let's say you wanted to set up a class, and then you wanted to set up an account with a test account as a student. When you are registering for that account, it will come up and ask you questions. And so you want to make sure that you choose that you want to register as a student if you want them to be able to join like an assignment. Let's say you want to assign something and see how it looks from the student perspective. Make sure that when you're registering for that account, you tag it as a student.
Thanks, Ryan. So we had a couple questions about the level of our content. So our content is leveled it's tagged to grades based on kind of the topics covered, and then basic, advanced, or kind of an at-grade level for that. It wasn't done necessarily by a software in that piece. It was done as we were writing our parts. So there's, different ones. You'll have different options for that basic, at grade, or advanced. Sometimes you'll have both of them. Sometimes you'll have sometimes you'll have all of them. Sometimes you'll have just kind of your standard at grade 1. So that was determined in the writing of it. It wasn't done using a particular kind of software reading option. And kind of with that same concept in mind, in terms of text leveling available, we don't have a current kind of built-in program that automatically rewrites our text and levels it to what you're looking for. You are more than welcome to do that and customize that. I have spoken to teachers that have adjusted the reading level to better meet the needs of their students. So you are more than welcome to do that, but it's not kind of a built-in software component in our system at this time. And then we had a great comment about kind of explaining how edits and viewing of documents are related to each other. We'll see if we can get some kind of visual representation made up and add it to our list of resources and on our help desk, and kind of see what our options are for that might be useful for you and others in the future. So thank you for that suggestion. And I think the other piece in there is the last question that we have here has to do with kind of centering within element boxes or centering in tables. That's not a current option within our site. So we do have kind of a standard set of editing tools. And if you're looking for extra funky formatting that may or may not be available within CK-12 at this time, we continue to enhance our stuff, but we also, because of the system working with kind of online as well as a downloaded print version, there are some restrictions in how that transfers cleanly. And so we do put some restrictions on the formatting that you can include on our system, so that if you were to use a downloaded version, it would be available and look the same in most regards, kind of, and not break in that piece. So we had one question here that has to do with adding chapters and combining more than one concept section into one section, not just into one chapter. So it's super easy to break sections. Basically, you can customize it multiple times and delete all the extra stuff out. If you were trying to combine multiple sections into one, currently your option basically is to kind of open them and copy them and paste them in. You may have to adjust some formatting when you do that, because sometimes the copy and paste pulls extra web code with it and kind of freezes it in extra funky formatting in terms of like the coloring or something like that. That's usually the one that I see the most, is that it's reading the displayed color. So just double check. You're welcome to pull that content and add that in, and then embed and change anything and adjust accordingly from there. If you just received an email, this is a program logistics question. If you just received an email saying you weren't in the webinar, it's probably from yesterday's webinar. So all email notifications for webinars go out 24 hours after the previous webinar ends. If for some reason you're seeing something related to this webinar, please email support or Jumpstart, and we'll kind of look into that and see what might be happening from that piece. But in general, you should get kind of that updated email. Here's what was happening. If you missed it, links to our program page so you can go back and register again. If you joined us, the direct links to the recording as well as the assignment. And we set those for 24 hours to give us time to kind of download this recording, get it cleanly up on YouTube, and go from there. So it looks like we're getting some other questions in here. So feel free to continue to add them in. As we said, we'll continue to stay on to address these. One is, if you've published a book or assigned it to a group or class, will your future edits be shared with the assigned group or class? The answer to that is yes. If they're accessing your direct link to your book, they will see kind of that book in the newest version. If for some reason they're reading an older version, they'll get a little pop-up that says, you're not reading the newest version. Would you like to see that? So that will be shared that way. And along those same lines, the differences that are publishing or sharing. So you can share a URL to anything, and it will read the most finalized version of that particular text. So if you are kind of choosing just to share that internally and not republish it, you can access that within your class to anyone who has that direct link. As soon as you click publish, that's when it's available via search. So that kind of search for free STEM teacher resources. that's when it would start showing up under the community contributed piece there, as well as if you added it to your schools page, it would show up under the schools icon. So it's really kind of allowing users to search and find that content outside of your individual team or class that you shared it directly with. Then we have a question in terms of steps to take when you finish your 7 classes. Tomorrow, today's Wednesday, yes, great. So tomorrow afternoon, Pacific time, we have our Maximizing Learning with CK-12 class. And in that course, we'll go through all the last details that you need to kind of wrap up that piece. That is one of the required courses for your 7 classes. You're more than welcome to take more than that. But at that point in time, we'll talk about all those last steps and kind of details and make sure everyone's on track and knows what they want to do for that. So join us for that session tomorrow. If for some reason you need to count that as your recorded version, then just check out the recording afterwards and we'll go through all of those details. We had a question here that has to do with creating multiple CK-12 accounts, one as a teacher and one as a student. You are more than welcome to do that. That is not a problem. Just note that if you create multiple accounts, your library will be distinct for each account. So make sure that if you're kind of creating and customizing resources, you're logged into your teacher account and you're doing that all in one place, because you don't want to end up saying, oh, I thought I made this assignment, or I thought I made this Flexbook, and instead it's living in my student account, so I can't find it when I go to assign it. So you're more than welcome to do that. That's not a problem. We are a free resource, so it's not like you'd have to pay for a second account or anything like that. But just make sure that you're doing all of your work in one place so you can see that. And yep, if you miss any session, go to the archived one and watch it. You can miss up to 1 live one and you'll still be certified. If you have issues with that, just email Jumpstart and let us know what's up and we can kind of work with you from there. Oh, this is a good question. That double account cannot be created with the same email. Your email address is the unique identifier for your account. So you would need to make a separate email address. You can go to Google and make, Mr. Clark's test student email account at gmail.com. Or, I maybe recommend not picking his name, maybe insert your own. But you can create that test email account and then use that, but you would need to do that as a different email with different settings for that piece. So make sure that you're not using the same one. So right now we have no open questions. We'll give you, just a little bit longer to kind of throw any last one in there or tell us to wait for a second if you're typing a long one. But as always, we will be back this afternoon for this afternoon session. We're available via office hours if you're looking to sign up for office hours, and we can kind of go from there. So I'm going to thank Ryan for joining me, and I think we'll end this webinar now.